Some things really rile me. Dishonesty is an example. See, politics is a confusing business. We've got to deal with the creation of laws and rules to convince hundreds of millions of people to live together in harmony. We've got to distribute resources and create tax regulations and make sure everybody obeys these laws and so on and so on. We've got to do all this. We don't need people muddying what are already opaque waters. And I think that's what's happened with a conversation between Ben Shapiro and Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson recently made a monologue on his program where he talked about the ideas that the free market is really just a tool that we should harness in order to improve our lives. And Ben Shapiro, in turn, wrote an essay on his website, The Daily Wire, where he tried to refute what Tucker Carlson had said. And I think Ben Shapiro's article is being dishonest, and that's what I want to go over in today's video. Tucker's monologue is interesting. His thesis is that the country's leaders have had a monomaniacal focus on superficial economic indicators like GDP. The leaders have wanted to make the country rich, and as they pursue this aim, they've ignored maladies that are attacking America's soul. Suicides are way up, joblessness is up, hopelessness is up, life satisfaction is down, people are working more and getting paid less. And our leaders don't seem to care about this because what they're focused on are these simple measures of economic prosperity. Are we making more money? Is more stuff getting produced? And things like that. And they're ignoring deeper aspects of human life. Worse, these metrics that our leaders are so obsessed with can essentially be gamed. As you focus on making GDP hit higher and higher levels all the time, what you may not be concerned with is the fact that fewer and fewer people are benefiting from the economic prosperity that is being created. So while it may be true that our country is richer than it's ever been, this wealth is becoming increasingly concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. And Tucker Carlson's monologue touches on all of these ideas as he tries to argue that the current direction of the country is a poor one. Shapiro, in his article in the Daily Wire, tries to rebut what Carlson is saying. Now, I think debate is a great idea. Sometimes it's necessary. And when two conflicting ideas come together, the tension and the friction between them can reveal true insights to the debaters and to the audience. However, this is really only true if the debaters are participating in good faith. If someone is lying or just trying to mislead you, then it becomes less likely that the debate will arrive at the truth. And I think that Ben Shapiro's style of argument is actually focusing more on hair-splitting and incorrect or misleading statistics than it is on actually trying to get to the bottom of the issues that Tucker Carlson is raising. I've got some examples. Tucker Carlson raises the idea that manufacturing has all but disappeared from the country. And the reason why he's bringing this up is he's raising the idea that men are losing productive jobs in the country. And when men lose these high-quality productive careers, they find it harder to get married and harder to have a family. And this results in fewer families having two parents, which is a social problem. Ben Shapiro tries to refute this idea. Shapiro says, first, manufacturing has not disappeared. It's remained stable while the rest of our economy has grown. Second, wages have not stagnated in the United States in material terms. Far from it. While wages have declined on an inflation-adjusted basis, that's not true in terms of what you can buy for the same wage. In other words, what we actually care about when we get a paycheck. Now, the idea that manufacturing hasn't disappeared, far from it, may strike you as surprising. I was certainly surprised by it. Luckily, Shapiro gave a source for what he means, and when we dig into this source, we can start to see what I meant by he's being dishonest. He's kind of hair-splitting and conflating two ideas. His source is a Forbes article, which gets into the idea that manufacturing in the United States has actually increased or stayed about the same if you consider manufacturing as the goods that are being produced. That is, the United States is making more goods. But if you think of manufacturing as manufacturing jobs, then Ben Shapiro's own source claims that manufacturing has declined in the country immensely. Pew Research puts some numbers to the debate. They say in 1987, there were 17.5 million Americans working manufacturing jobs. By the year 2017, that figure had fallen to 12.5 million. So between 1987 and 2017, the population increased. There are about 100 million new Americans, but the number of people working manufacturing jobs decreased by about 5 million. What that means is that manufacturing jobs decreased both proportionally, manufacturing is a smaller percentage of employment, and it decreased in real terms. There are 5 million fewer manufacturing jobs than there were in 1987. And these ideas, this distinction between manufacturing, the productive output of factories, and manufacturing jobs is something that distinction is made in Ben Shapiro's source. So it's really hard to see how this is anything but dishonest when Ben Shapiro says, no, manufacturing hasn't decreased, manufacturing's remained stable. And he gives a source, and the source says manufacturing jobs have decreased proportionally and in real terms. It's only manufacturing output which has remained somewhat stable or increased over the years. If all you care about is GDP, then hey, this is great news. Guess what? We're more productive. Fewer people are making more things. That's great. But this is also kind of exactly Tucker's point. Tucker Carlson's point is that the elites in charge of our society have become too focused on this idea of let's produce more, let's increase GDP at all costs. And what has been lost in their narrow-minded focus is the quality of the life of people who used to have good, productive careers. So the trade-off is being made. Hey, we can ship our jobs overseas. Hey, we can automate things. And the result is that we will produce more stuff at less cost. But the other result is that people who used to have productive, fulfilling careers no longer do. And Tucker Carlson is saying that the people who run our society should at least have that as a concern. They should be concerned with the well-being of people and not just the productive output of our economy. Shapiro also says wages have not stagnated in the United States in material terms. Far from it. While wages have declined on an inflation-adjusted basis, that's not true in terms of what you can buy for the same wage. In other words, what we actually care about when we get a paycheck. Furthermore, non-wage benefits have expanded dramatically since 1979. They now amount to about 30 and 40% of earnings. There's a lot to unpack there. First, it's just flat out confusing when Shapiro says that wages have declined on an inflation-adjusted basis, but they haven't declined in terms of what we can buy. That's confusing because inflation is supposed to account for the kinds of things that we can buy at different times. So if wages are decreasing or stagnant on an inflation-adjusted basis, but you can buy more stuff, that doesn't really make any sense. Those two ideas are contradictory. Now, what Ben Shapiro means is that some things have actually become cheaper, and other things have become fundamentally better than they were in the past. So an example of something that's become fundamentally better is a car. A car that you could buy in 1970 would be a lot less efficient. It wouldn't have all the safety features. It wouldn't drive as fast or as far or be as reliable as even a cheap car that you could buy today. So how do you account for that when you're measuring inflation? How do you account for the fact that a 2018 or 2019 car is just better than any car you could buy in the 1970s? An example of things becoming cheaper is stuff like electronics. Because we're now manufacturing most of our electronics in China, where we can get labor for really cheap, we've actually driven down the cost of some electronics, like, for example, a coffee maker. Those things are a lot cheaper now. And so Shapiro is saying, yeah, if you do all of the adjustments for inflation, people have actually lost money. But if you just look at some particular items, some things are a lot better now than they were in the 1970s. So this is, again, really kind of confusing and dishonest. First, it's dishonest because if you add everything up and try to take into account all the different things that you might spend money on, that would be adjusting for inflation. And that would show you that, yes, wages have in fact declined. Whereas if you just focus on a few particular high-tech or manufacturing-intensive products, you could say that, well, these have gotten cheaper, so? In other words, Ben Shapiro is saying, yeah, sure, healthcare, education, childcare, and food all might have increased in cost, but at least computer software is cheaper, and your cell phone is a lot better than any phone you could buy in 1970, and so on. It seems like what Shapiro is doing is just trying to confuse things by bringing up a lot of complexity and kind of denying the real fact that in inflation-adjusted terms, wages have remained stagnant or declined. So Tucker Carlson says wages have remained stagnant for decades, and Ben Shapiro says, oh, no. Wages may have remained stagnant, but some things that you can buy have become cheaper or better. Well, another reason this is a problem, aside from just being confusing and a bit dishonest, is that Ben Shapiro is crediting to our economic system and our political leadership the inventions that have happened in the intervening decades. So some inventions have just made cars better. And Ben Shapiro's idea is, see, isn't this great? Our monomaniacal focus on increasing GDP has made our cars better. But that's not really true. Inventions accrue over time. Inventions happen when there are smart, creative people who have the time and inclination to work on them. And yes, it's true that our political and economic organizations can incentivize people to work on inventions, but there's no reason to suppose, as Ben Shapiro seems to implicitly assume, that it's necessary to have this pure focus on GDP in order to get the kind of inventions that we want. So over the past several decades, our leaders have had this focus on GDP, and some productive inventions have occurred. But there's nothing to say that those inventions are a consequence of our system focusing purely on GDP, and that those inventions couldn't have come about in any other system. In other words, if we need some kind of socialized healthcare to take care of people who are poor but also sick, and we need more government intervention or regulations in market in order to make people have better, more productive, more fulfilling lives, there's nothing inherent about that that would say, well, if the government is going to pay for your health care, then nobody can invent anything that'll make cars safer, or even that it would be less likely for someone to invent something that would make cars safer. That argument just isn't there, and it's not intuitive at all, and Ben Shapiro doesn't even try to make it. Instead, he's just kind of relying on the fact that, hey, things have gotten better in the past few decades, must be because of our system, must be because of how our system is working. I dispute that. And the fact that Shapiro has this kind of latent assumption built into his argument, again, dishonest, unclear. The idea that non-wage benefits have increased is also something of a red herring or misleading. Ben Shapiro is saying, sure, wages have been stagnant, but non-wage benefits have increased. And non-wage benefits is primarily healthcare. And while it's true that employers are giving more value in terms of healthcare to employees than they used to, it's also true that the cost of healthcare is expanding rapidly, more than most other services. So there's ballooning costs in healthcare, and as a result, your employers have to pay you more money to get you healthcare. And Ben Shapiro is citing that like it's a good thing, like it's a feature of our economy. Hey, sure, you aren't making more money, but at least it costs more when you get sick. Shapiro says that the middle class in the United States hasn't disappeared. It's become mostly upper middle class. 30% of Americans were upper middle class in 2014, as opposed to 12% in 1979. I didn't find the exact link in Shapiro's essay where he got these numbers from. When I looked it up in Pew Research, I saw something else. I saw that in the 1970s, the middle class was about 61% of people, and by 2010, and by 2015, the middle class was 50% of people. And that while, yes, the upper middle and the highest class did increase, they only increased by small amounts. I was able to search around and find a report from the Urban Institute, which does use Ben Shapiro's numbers, and there was an article in the Wall Street Journal which summarized this Urban Institute report. And so I guess Ben Shapiro's numbers are coming from here. But this, again, is dishonest, because Shapiro says, hey, don't worry about the middle class. It's true they're getting smaller, but that's because they're all becoming richer. They're all moving from the middle class into the upper middle class. Isn't that great? But the Urban Institute report that I think Shapiro is citing, because it uses the same numbers and the same figures that Shapiro does, the Urban Institute report is actually making the exact opposite case. It's making the case that Tucker Carlson is making. The Urban Institute report points out that while the economy has been working very well for a limited subset of people, namely the top 1% and the upper middle class, so kind of the top 20%, let's say, well, the economy's been working very well for the top 20% of people. It hasn't been working as well for everybody else, for 80% who are below that. The Urban Institute report says, yeah, a lot of money and wealth has been gained by the richest few, but this is resulting in a concentration of wealth and income into the richest few. And actually, over time, the income and the wealth for the middle and lower classes is stagnating or decreasing. They have decreasing in relative terms. They have less relative wealth than they ever did before. They have less relative wealth than they did before. The other thing to take note of from the Urban Institute report is that it's measuring the income of households. So a household is increasing its wealth above the 100,000 line. And Ben Shapiro is citing this as a good thing. Hey, don't worry about the middle class shrinking. It's because they're going to the expanding upper middle class. But the reason why that's not such a great thing is because one of the major factors in why the households that do, why they have increasing incomes, one of the major factors, it's not necessarily because a worker's wage has increased. Remember, we saw before that wages are stagnant in real dollars. The reason is that households now have dual incomes more frequently. 1970s is about the year when it switched from most households had only a single parent, had only a single wage earner, to most households having two wage earners. The proportion of women working increases over time. Shapiro makes it seem like, hey, this is great, don't worry about the shrinking middle class. The reason it's shrinking is because people are going into the upper middle class. But remember, the Urban Institute is taking into account household incomes. And one reason that household incomes are increasing, getting above the 100 to 350,000 line, which makes you upper middle class, household incomes are increasing not because workers are getting paid more, but because more people in the household are working. That is, it used to be that households got by with only a single income earner. But now it's increasingly popular for there to be two income earners in the same household. And so yes, with two income earners, more people are getting above the $100,000 a year mark and technically becoming upper middle class, but they have to work two jobs. They have to have two income earners in order to do that. So we're competing now with two workers against what used to be one worker. In other words, Shapiro is kind of saying, hey, you've increased the amount of money you're making, and all you had to do was double the hours you work. Isn't that great? We're moving people from the middle to the upper middle class. One of the problems that occurs to me while reading the Urban Institute report is in the definition of middle class. Defining it in terms of dollars and cents that you earn strikes me as kind of heartless and blind in the same way that Tucker Carlson is critiquing, where all you're focused on is dollars and cents. Middle class to me is much more of a lifestyle. So if I think of two groups of people, one is a family who owns their own home, who has one person working and one person staying at home with the number of kids that they want, taking care of those kids and raising them the way they want. And this household has two cars and they can go on vacation when they want. And they're not in debt and they're saving money. And they're educated the way they want. This household to me is living the middle class lifestyle, regardless of how many dollars and cents they make. And if you contrast that to another group of people, say a married couple who lives in a loft in the city, and they both work $60,000 a year jobs, but they're paying down student loan debt, and they're taking care of their cats, and they're in debt, and they're trying to keep up. To me, this seems a lot less like the middle class lifestyle than the first household I described. And the problem that Tucker Carlson is getting at in his monologue is that our government, our leaders are focused on, we've got to earn more money, we've got to increase GDP, we've got to increase the bottom line, we've got to look at these simple statistics and make these numbers go up. But at the same time, we're abandoning the soul of the country. We're abandoning what makes life important. We're not focusing on that. We're sacrificing meaning in exchange for increasing dollars and cents. And that's the point that Tucker Carlson is getting at in his monologue. Ben Shapiro is just coming back at him with these misleading arguments that aren't actually borne out by the research. And he's citing things in in ways that contradict the intent of the original author. So when Tucker Carlson says manufacturing jobs have vanished, Shapiro says, nope, manufacturing's remained the same. And he cites an article that admits manufacturing jobs have vanished, even if manufacturing productive output has remained the same or increased. Or Tucker Carlson says the middle class is decreasing. And Ben Shapiro says, no, a small percentage of the middle class has moved up into the upper middle class. So it's not bad that they're decreasing, or they're getting richer. But he forgets things like only a small percentage of the middle class is increasing. The rest of the middle class is either becoming poor or just remaining in the middle class and having stagnant wages. And Shapiro forgets that, yes, the middle class is now earning more money, but they're also working more. Shapiro says that, hey, it's not all bad. The middle class has more benefits. But he forgets that the more benefits are because of the rising cost of healthcare. Shapiro is throwing out arguments and misleading statistics, and he's trying to confuse his readers. And that's what I think is dishonest, and that's what I think is harmful to the political debate. I think the ideas in Tucker Carlson's monologue are interesting and worthwhile. It's a conversation to pursue. And I personally agree that our leaders have had an inappropriate focus on very simple statistics. And we need to consider more than just what the country earns or more than what the country produces. We need to consider, are people having a good life? And we need to work to increase the number of people who are. And I think the dishonest debate, in this instance put forward by Ben Shapiro, takes us away from that worthy effort. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know by clicking the like button. If you want to see more content in a similar style, go ahead and subscribe. Thanks for your time.